Welcome to Answering God's Call. I'm your host, Stanley Ermoff. The theme for this show is taken from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18, which says, "We fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." In this show, we invite priests and religious to share with us their call to the consecrated life and their seen and unseen dedication to God in His continuing work of salvation and the church's work of conversion, in a desire to glorify God and be a blessing to our viewers. Our guest today is Father Jeremy Zipple of the Society of Jesus, who is on assignment to St. Martin de Porres Parish, where we are on location. Welcome, Father Jeremy.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Stanley.
Okay.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to start by asking you to give us a sense of your boyhood years, where you grew up, your family, neighborhood environment, early education up to about age 12.
Sure. Well, I'm from Mississippi. Actually, I was born in Oklahoma, but when I was pretty young, my family moved to South Mississippi, and that's where I grew up. If you know anything about the southern United States, it's the Bible Belt. I think, as I said to my congregation in my homily here at St. Martin's on Sunday, we were maybe 1% Catholic in my hometown, but about 100% Christian. It's just that all the Christians were Southern Baptist and evangelicals, and we Catholics kind of felt like, I was joking with the congregation on Sunday, I was in band when I was in the 8th grade in junior high school, and a girl would come in almost every week and ask me, "Have you gotten down on your knees and accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior?" And I was a Catholic, so I was like deer in headlights. I didn't even know what that meant, So that was the background. I went to Catholic school briefly. We did have a Catholic school in our town, but it only went up to 6th grade, so I was there from grades 3 to 6, but public school for the rest of the time, junior high and high school. But even though we were in the middle of the Bible Belt and most of our friends and people I went to school with were Baptist, we had a strong little Catholic community in town, and that was very important to me, very important to my parents. Went to church every Sunday, prayed the rosary as a family. My dad went to daily mass every day, as a matter of fact, and had one sister, so mom, dad, and a sister, and faith was very much a part of our life.
Okay. Yeah, anybody else in the priest or nun, sister?
In the family, yes, sorry. Man, I'm forgetting the most important one of all. I have an aunt who is a nun. She's now 94 years old, up in Detroit, Michigan. She's a Sister of the Sacred Heart, an RSCJ nun, a Religious of the Sacred Heart. And she's really been one of my biggest role models throughout life. She was kind of one of those radical nuns in the 60s who, religious life was changing, and, nuns had lived in the convent and whatever, and she went out into the streets, into inner city Detroit, and worked at a parish for several decades, working with poor kids and gang kids, particularly with Latino kids in inner city Detroit, and particularly with young women, and so that was her ministry. And I actually was up in Detroit for a week with her this past summer, staying at her nun retirement home. She's now in a nun retirement home. When she went to 2 years ago, she really didn't want to go. She wanted to stay in inner city Detroit, but she broke her hip, and so they finally made her go there. Okay. So she's praying now. But she's a great woman. Even now, she's got a very sharp sense of humor and a real passion for the Lord.
So the call was in your DNA.
The call was probably in my DNA. Yeah, thanks to her.
Absolutely, sure. Okay, tell us about the higher education experience, favorite subjects, what you wanted to be in your circle of friends.
Sure, okay. Well, so I went from a public high school in South Mississippi, and because I think that I was raised around Baptist and not many Catholics, I wanted to go to a Catholic university. That was something that I just kind of set my mind on. And I also wanted to get out of Mississippi. I wanted to see another part of the country. So I thought pretty seriously about going to Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. And I almost went there. I came this close to going there. But the other school that I was seriously considering was Boston College, a Jesuit university in Boston. And ultimately, I was going back and forth on the two of those, and I decided Boston was a more interesting city. South Bend, Indiana, where Notre Dame is a pretty quiet country town, so I wanted to go to a big city, and that's how I ended up in Boston at a Jesuit university. I really didn't know anything about the Jesuits growing up, though. I often joke there are no Jesuits in Mississippi unless I'm going home to visit my parents, and there's one.
So you put a mark on yourself.
That's right, exactly. I'm the only one.
Absolutely. Tell me something, in public education, is any religion taught? I mean, how did you...
No.
How did you stay close to...
Yeah. In the United States, we have a very strict separation of church and state, so you can't have religious education in a public school. Now, we fudge that a little bit in Mississippi because it's such a Christian area, so there were, we had prayer at our football games, and sometimes all the Baptists would gather around the flagpole and pray in the mornings. But, as a Catholic, that made me kind of feel uncomfortable, so I kind of appreciated the separation of church and state. But it was through the parish, that we had religious education. So every Sunday morning we would have Sunday school,
The Catholic parish.
Exactly, Catholic parish. So we did have a lot of religious education, but it was all through the parish. It wasn't part of the school education at all, the public school education.
And even though your Catholics were a minority, you were able to stay together somehow
and I think
in that bigger Baptist community.
I think in some ways it really made us more intentional about our faith. This is the interesting thing. When I went up to Boston to go to college, Boston is a very, very Catholic town, Irish Catholic town, and the Catholicism there is very entrenched. It's very old East Coast Catholicism. And I was actually disappointed when I got up there and saw the church in Boston, because it was kind of tired. It was kind of old and sort of, just doing things the way they had always done, because, the churches were well established and old. Whereas in Mississippi, because I think we had the competition from the Protestants, who were always coming up with new ways to do evangelization with their young people, youth ministry, who were always, and there were a bunch of Baptist churches who were competing with each other. It made the Catholics a little bit more on their game. And then we also had kind of a missionary zeal, a mentality, The priests weren't all like, wearing their French cuffs and, Father knows best. No, it was a lay church, that lay people always took initiative down there, because we just never had that many priests. So because of the Baptist influence and because of the missionary mentality, it actually made us, I think, a little bit quicker on our game and more intentional about what we were doing. We couldn't just sort of sit back on our laurels and say, well, this is the way we've always done it.
So in Boston, what age would you be?
So I went to Boston at age 18
to
a Jesuit university. And I have to say that even though I found the church in general in Boston a little bit, tired, at a Jesuit university I found it very life-giving. And it was a phenomenal experience for me to be at a Jesuit university. Honestly, I'd never heard of the Jesuits when I landed on that campus at age 18, except for like a little mention in a history class in high school. I remember I had a European history teacher, Frau Thomas, we called her. She was German. And I remember she spoke about the Jesuits with esteem. As far as I know, she was an atheist and had no religion whatsoever. She certainly wasn't a Baptist in South Mississippi. She was an outsider like us. But she always talked about the Jesuits with esteem. But that was the only thing I knew about them going to Boston College.
Esteem being another word for spirit.
Right, exactly. And I have to tell you, I visited Boston. I didn't know anything about the school and the Jesuits. I really didn't. We were in the United States. You go around and, if you're a good student, and I was a good student in college, you go around and you look at universities with your family and you try and, you apply to several and you try. So I was visiting a year, this was a year before my last year of high school, senior year, summer before senior year, we call it, And so 1 year from now, I would be going off to university, and I was trying to figure out which university to go to. And we were taking a trek up the East Coast, visiting various places with my family, Washington, D.C., Georgetown University, and another Jesuit school that I thought about. Then we went to Boston and looked at Harvard and some of the secular schools there. And my dad said, well, there's this Jesuit school, Boston College. Why don't we go and check it out since we're in town already? It was very much on a whim. It was not anything we'd planned to do. So we drove over to the campus. It was too late to get an interview or anything. We sat in on a session about the school and visited the campus, and it was really nice. I had a very good feeling about the place. And then there was I don't know if this is appropriate for TV, but my dad went to the bathroom and ended up chatting in the bathroom in adjacent, stalls.
Well, man to man, that's fine.
With the director of admissions of Boston College,
Yeah.
who was a very Jesuit-minded man. John Mahoney is his name. And they had a good conversation. And John Mahoney said, well, let me, you're from Mississippi. He was ecstatic to see somebody from Mississippi in Boston because not many of us make it up that way. He said, well, let's have a conversation with him. So I sat down then and there with the head of admissions for the school, and we had a wonderful conversation about the Jesuit Catholic nature of the school and other things. And it just felt right. I never knew anything about Jesuits or this school until that day that we, by providence, I will say, ended up on campus. And that night, my dad says to me, you know what today is? July 31st, 1995, the feast of St. Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits.
Okay.
So that was the day that I first visited that campus and first met the Jesuits, and that would ultimately lead me into the Society of Jesus. And so it was Ignatius's feast day, so I have to believe that it was his intervention.
So you were feeling the call already, or you were looking just at education, and at education, what were you really interested in?
I was not really interested in becoming a priest at that time. I mean, I thought about it a little bit like most boys growing up Catholic do, but it was not anywhere something that I was ready to sign up on the dotted line for. And I didn't really feel any special calling to the diocesan priests that I had grown up with in Mississippi. They were good men, but just not what I was felt at all called to.
So what did you want to be?
Going to university, I wanted to do journalism. I wanted to do media, and that's what I went in communications was my major. I had always done documentary films. Even in high school, I had a little business. We did a number of documentaries, and we also did videos of weddings and dance recitals. So that's how we made money in high school. So I wanted to do journalism, and that's what I majored in. And I actually did a fair amount of it. Even inside the Jesuits, I worked for National Geographic Television in Washington, D.C. for 3 years as a Jesuit in training because I have these skills. So it was something that was early on an interest in that I thought I was going to do, and I did throughout college, and then kind of had a little veer to into this life.
Journalism, perfect. All right, now, could you share with us your journey, the journey of your call to becoming a priest?
Sure.
You can explain why you chose the Jesuit, how it almost happened, rather than you decided.
Right, exactly.
And
God told me that
years
way.
of studies and training.
Yeah.
So.
But I'll tell you, sure. Well, so I was in college. I was not really thinking very seriously about becoming a Jesuit. Of course, I was interested in girls. I was interested in, partying. I was interested in the things that we do in college in the States. But there was something that was just kind of nagging at me, and I couldn't get away from it, And I went on a couple retreats. I went on a silent retreat that a Jesuit recommended, very powerful, and I just couldn't drop that feeling. Right after I graduated, I decided to do a volunteer teaching year, volunteer at a Catholic school, which is something that sometimes we who come out of Jesuit schools decide to do, Jesuit volunteers. There's some here in Belize. So I volunteered at this school for 2 years, and I loved it. And each time I kept thinking about going back and doing something in media or business. That was the other area that I had thought about. I couldn't shake that feeling. And then I did an interview.
What was the feeling? Could you just say a little bit about that feeling?
I would say, some people have vocation stories where Jesus, drops through the ceiling and he's like, he's like, do it. That was not my experience. I would just say there was a little nagging of the heart that I could not, that just kind of kept tugging, like try this out, and it wasn't anything other than this sort of quiet, the still small voice, of Elijah, this tender, like.
And can you say why it was there? What triggered that? Or it just grew on you?
Just growing on me. There wasn't one single thing. Okay. It was something that I would say, I was really impressed in college with the Jesuits that I met there. I had a Jesuit who was a professor in the media journalism school, and then I had a double major in economics because I was also thinking business. And there was a Jesuit who was an economics professor of mine. And both of them were really, really smart men at the top of their academic secular disciplines, but they were also men of faith. And that just stuck with me. These men who could have been top-notch in their secular disciplines and were in a way, but they were also merging it with the life of faith. And that appealed to me. That's something that's always been part of the Jesuit, archaism, blending, learnedness with faith. And that was what really, appealed to me about the Society of Jesus.
We have to go to a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Answering God's Call. Well, Father Jeremy, I think we are warming up to your call when we had to go to break. And could you continue with what you're saying and tell us if you had any challenges in the process and how you overcame those?
Yeah, sure. Well, so I was doing this volunteer 2 years of teaching in a Catholic school in New Jersey. Absolutely loved it, and I was thinking about what I would do next. And would I, keep teaching? Would I take my economics? I had an offer from a big company to do economics, or something else. And really, what happened is one day I got a call from this company that I had applied to. It's called McKinsey & Company. It's a big consulting company.
Absolutely.
And it would have been a very good job, and I think a good next step with my skills. And I was on the phone. I had been through a few interviews and whatever, and this guy that I interviewed with, he called me back, and he was calling from like vacation in Aspen, Colorado, and it was clear that he had been up late the night before having fun and whatever, and really liked the company, whatever. And I'm interviewing him, and he's chatting with me. He said, we think you are great, your resume, your skills, everything, but there is one thing that's missing, and it just doesn't seem like you're passionate about this. Your heart doesn't seem to be into it. And I said, you know what, I think you're right. I didn't say it to him in the time. I was kind of actually taken aback at the time, like, I guess, I failed this interview or something.
So he was drawing that from the interview?
Yes, from the whole thing. Like, like, you just don't seem passionate about working for us, and I thought, after the conversation, I was mulling it over for the next day or two, and I was thinking about, I love these kids that I'm teaching right now, some of whom have a lot of problems, and but I'm trying to, it's a Catholic school. I'm trying to teach them, what it means to be faithful young people, and I just thought there's too many needs in the world. For me to go and take a job that I consider about me, making money and about my successful career. Honestly, that was a moment of decision for me. It wasn't like I heard Jesus say, you must do this. It was sort of this discernment that had been percolating for a long time. And so then I called the vocation director for the New Orleans province, and I started a conversation with him after that experience. That ultimately led me to deciding to enter. Now, I have to be frank with you, Stanley. When I entered, I didn't think that I was going to stay. I thought, I've had this feeling in my heart for several years now, and it ain't going away, so I got to get it out of the system, I'm going to I'm going to apply, see if they'll take me, and I'm going to go to the novitiate and kind of get it out of my system and work through it. That is, honestly, I wouldn't have admitted that at the time, but it was sort of like, all right, this ain't going away. This feeling's not going away. I got to go test it out, but I'm sure God is going to get me back under the route toward getting married and having a family and all that,
You're about what, 18, 20?
I was 23, 24 now, and then I was 20. I had just turned 25 when I started the novitiate. Yeah, so, and the obstacles, we asked about the obstacles. Well, I think, they're the obstacles that are still there, I mean, even years later, to the feeling of wanting to have a family, and wanting to have a wife, and to, and to live that kind of life. I also, have always struggled with my ambitions of, like I said, to be in business or to do media stuff full time. I've done a lot of media stuff as a Jesuit, you know. So
But you still can. As a
yes,
Jesuit.
and I've done a lot. I've done a lot as a
absolutely,
Jesuit.
yeah.
So that was one thing that I was not expecting. You know, when I entered the Jesuits, I thought, well, I'm not going to do this anymore. And then I entered the novitiate, and after 1 year in the novitiate, I got sent down to Belize to right here.
Okay.
For 6 months, a long experiment we call it. In novitiate, we have these things that are called experiments, and I got working for the diocesan television station that isn't really around anymore. But I was working in the diocesan media over there, and also helping out here a bit at St. Martin's and over at St. John's in the sixth form, and also at the prison. And very quickly, I was doing media stuff and really engaged back in it. I thought I had left it at the door when I entered the novitiate, and then I was doing it again. And it's turned out that I've done it for most of my Jesuit life. I've been involved in it, sometimes full-time, sometimes part-time ministry. But before I was here, I was working for several years for America Magazine, the Jesuit Media Apostolate in New York City, the National Jesuit Media Apostolate, which I'd started a video unit there. We're doing a lot of media for social media. Yeah. So it's sort of interesting, especially in the Society of Jesus. I think that's one thing about the Jesuits that I love. You know, the Lord really, it's an order where the superiors really look at what are the gifts that you bring to the priesthood and to religious life, and they try and put those to use for the church and for the kingdom of God. You know, you don't have to, you kind of come with what, you know, we are many parts. God has given you these gifts, and now let's put them on the service.
What more wonderful gift than being in the media in the, this day and age. Yeah. Because we are fighting against media. You know, all the onslaught is coming through the media. Yeah. I want to go back to something though.
Sure.
So, your call is sort of confirmed by somebody who is not in the consecrated life, listening to you in an interview and saying, I don't hear the passion. Okay? So you enter the novitiate, and you're saying, well, okay, Lord, I want to lay this before you. This is on me. I don't know where it's going. I want to lay it on you. What confirmed to you that, this is this is my purpose? Now, I'll find your job. Your job is media, by the way, but my purpose is, How did that translate into more conviction?
I would say that I would answer that in two ways. I would say the first way is you know, I will just say this in a way that as I told my congregation on Sunday when I was preaching about the letter of James. Okay. And, you know, James says, faith without works is dead. He said, how can you call yourself a person of faith if you walk by the poor person on the street who's starving and needs food? You know, that's what James says. And so I was saying that sometimes the evangelical can have this attitude of, have you gotten down on your knees and been saved, accepted Jesus Christ for this one moment up in your room by yourself? No, we Catholics believe that every day faith is a choice that you make, you know. Do I serve God and His people each morning when I wake up and when I walk out on the street and see a person who needs Jesus, you know? Am I going to choose to be the face and the eyes and the ears of Jesus? So and there's a sense in which my vocation is every day, you know. Every day I wake up and say, Lord, give me the grace to live this well, just as I do with being a Christian more generally. But the moment in novitiate for me was the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola, the 30-day silent retreat. St. Ignatius, I don't know if you know anything about his background.
I made a retreat too.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's spent over 6 months here, though.
Yes, right. That's the 19th annotation, it's called, where you can do it in your day-to-day life over the course of 6 months or so. Ignatius, you know, he was a wild young man, you know. He wanted to be a knight who went around wooing women and saving people and doing big kind of things, but he had an injury that led to a big conversion on the battlefield. Right. You know, he was kind of being an idiot, actually. He was defending a fort out of pride, and he knew he was going to lose the battle, and he did it anyway. And of course, he got knocked in the knee with a cannonball, and they had this long convalescence. And on his journey, it was a really long, torturous journey. People sometimes forget how excruciating his conversion was. And he went from one way, being a very secular person, to the extreme other way of being this really crazily, kind of crazed, overly pious, overly scrupulous Christian who thought he fell so short of God's mercy that he wanted to commit suicide. Literally, he had a very serious bouts of suicide because he thought he was so unworthy of God's mercy, So he went from one extreme to the other. And along the way, he was trying to find the path, and it took him a long, long time to do that, really years. But he made this experience of retreat over many months, and then learning to listen to God's call in all of this chaos in his life. And he wrote it down and made it into a retreat called the Spiritual Exercises because he wanted other people to experience what he had without kind of the, the torturous years of process that it took him. And so every Jesuit at the beginning, when they're in novitiate, at the beginning of their formation, do the full 30-day silent retreat version of the Spiritual Exercises, St. Ignatius Loyola. And it was revolutionary for me, I mean, it was, I'm an extrovert. I like to talk to people. Being 30 days of silence, that scared the heck out of me when, going into it. It really did. It was not, people sometimes say, retreat is a vacation with God. It was not. It was a workout. It was like, it was like 30 days of, CrossFit marathon, whatever, It was really, really, really intense, 30 days, but so many moments of tremendous grace in that retreat, a couple very, very intense moments of grace. But that was kind of like God saying, I love you very much, and I want you to choose to follow me in freedom, not out of fear, not out of duty or obligation or all those other things. No, choose to follow me in this path because this is a path of peace where I've called you to, and that you trust that. So it was 30 days, 30 of the most intense days of my life. But that was really the moment of confirmation.
You were signed, sealed, and delivered.
That's right, exactly.
A couple more questions for this section here. Any personal highlights about the day you were ordained? You remember anything special there? Or it all happened in the Ignatian retreat?
I would say the decision to take vows as a Jesuit was even more important than my ordination day. I know that some people will find that shocking, but for religious, we make that decision first, and there are Jesuits who are novices, there are Jesuits who are scholastics, that means they're in training to be a priest, there are Jesuits who are brothers who will never be ordained.
Okay.
So we are, the famous brother Carl Swift,
right.
Who will never be ordained. So we choose to become Jesuits first, and then the decision to ordination is something that may or may not come out of that first decision of religious life. But ordination day was a joyful celebration. It was in New Orleans with my family. To tell you the truth, it was kind of a blur. It was very overwhelming, all of these people from different points of my life coming to celebrate with me. And I was ordained by a wonderful bishop, the Archbishop of New Orleans, Greg Amond. I have a funny story which is too long to tell about him, but anyway, and we've become good friends over the years, and subsequent to that. But he, so it was just a very joyful day, all of your brothers. The wonderful thing about being a Jesuit is all of your brothers from all over the place come to join you in that day and surround you with their prayer. Yeah. Friends from college, So it was a.
So you had accepted your vows already, if that's the correct expression.
That's right, exactly,
so,
yes.
That's not about the ordination mass. You were reconciled with that entirely.
Right, exactly.
Good.
I would say the grace of priesthood has come after the ordination. It's just in the doing of it, the ability to hear people's confessions and the ability to celebrate Mass, to celebrate the Eucharist. I mean, those are really powerful experiences. They said that Ignatius, in fact, if you read Ignatius Loyola's journals, his writings, he cried a lot when he was celebrating Mass. And, sometimes that happens to me too. It's just a feeling of God's presence so powerful, even as you look out at the congregation and look at yourself and you feel like the brokenness of human beings and the way that we're all struggling to follow Jesus in our own ways and so imperfectly sometimes. But here we are walking with the Lord around this table of the Eucharist. it's a really, really powerful thing to feel Jesus' presence in that way. And so, there have certainly been moments celebrating the Eucharist when I kind of lose it,
Precious moments.
Exactly.
Really. Okay.
And confession is a very powerful sacrament as well, to people entrust their deepest, darkest secrets to you, and you are there to provide God's mercy and forgiveness, to remind them that in spite of the journey they've taken, and the falls that they've had, that the Lord's love is still always there for the taking. So I'd say it's in the doing of those sacraments that the grace of priesthood has come. Ordination Day was a great celebration, but I didn't feel like, my vow day as a Jesuit was equally as important,
Oh, wait, we have to go to break, but very quickly, if you could tell us about your responsibilities since becoming a priest, very quickly.
Okay. Wow. Well, since becoming a priest, I went back to do a licentiate in STL. It's a pontifical degree at Boston College School of Theology and Ministry, which is where I did my seminary. I went back to that's a place where Jesuits do seminary training these days. I was working in campus ministry there, and also doing film and media work.
Campus ministry is what, teenagers?
Yeah, university students, which was wonderful. To be able to be back at the place where I first found my calling to the Jesuit life, and now working with young people. Just a real great gift to do that. And then I was also working in media at that time as well, for a secular public broadcasting in the United States, PBS, working on a documentary on pilgrimages. And then from there, I went to New Orleans for a while to work in a parish, a Jesuit parish there, and also working at a Jesuit university, Loyola, New Orleans, in media. So I've always kind of done media along with my sacramental ministry. And then from there, I went to America Magazine, the Jesuit Media Apostolate in New York City, and was working in media, Catholic media, pretty much full-time up there. And then to Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish in San Antonio, Texas. This is the shirt for Our Lady of Guadalupe Media. Yes. And then from San Antonio, the parish in San Antonio, here to Belize. So I've been ordained a little over 5 years. So I've actually had a lot of assignments in 5 years. The Jesuits, you get moved around sometimes.
Yeah, they're really working you.
Yes.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Answering God's Call. Father Jeremy, we've been talking about your life before and after becoming a priest, and your roles and responsibilities as a priest, all of which are very necessary in living out your consecrated life. I would like to move our conversation. I'd like to shift gear a little bit to a deeper level and talk about your inner life of dedication to God, your unseen and eternal, as Scripture puts it, dedication. And I would like to start by setting the scene for our viewers. So for the sake of our viewers, I want to explain that when I use the word intimate or intimacy or intimately, I'm referring to the spiritual bond that develops when we share knowledge about our deep inner self with another person in a safe, close, personal, and exclusive relationship. Now, somebody came up with a way of explaining intimacy by the words into me, see, which I think is quite smart, because if you say into me, see fast enough, it's intimacy. Okay. In St. John's Gospel, chapter 17, verse 3, on the night before Jesus was crucified, after he had instituted the Eucharist, and he was discoursing with his disciples, Jesus said, "Now this is eternal life, that they know you, Father, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent." I take eternal life and heaven to mean the same thing. And if that is correct, then Jesus is saying that we will spend our heaven getting to know God intimately. Okay. Also in St. Mark's Gospel, chapter 12, verses 30 to 31, Jesus tells us that the first great commandment, and therefore our first purpose in life, is to love God with all our heart, with all our mind, with all our soul, and with all our strength. describing the fullest way for us to love God intimately. So Jesus tells us that our first purpose in this life is to love God intimately, and our reward in heaven will be to know God intimately. The eternal face-to-face, as St. Therese delightfully puts it. So Father Jeremy, could you share with us how important it is for you as a priest to have an intimate relationship with God, and why?
Well, it's absolutely essential, you know. I mean, what are we doing here if you don't, you know? And I think, you know, God is always faithful, you know. We have our good hair days and our bad hair days as Christians, you know. We have those days when we feel the Spirit moving alive in our heart and our ministry, and we get up to preach, and the Spirit is so powerful and filling our hearts. We have those days when, you know, we're listening to a confession, and it's just so easy to see Jesus' face alive in the person who is sharing these intimate details of their own struggles and their own faith life. We have those days when we're working with the kids over here, and they just get it, and they understand, you know, the catechesis and the teaching or whatever. But there are also those days, I don't know if I should say it, but I had a school mass yesterday morning. It was the first one of the year, and we had the second standard, third standard, fourth standard, and it was chaos, and people were just running all over the place, and the kids were probably too young to come to mass, and you're like, what are we doing here, you know? Or those days right now in the United States, we're dealing with the clerical abuse scandal, you know, which is hitting the states very hard again. You know, it hit us in 2002, but now it's hitting us again hard, because it turns out there were a lot of bishops who, you know, didn't deal with things properly, didn't exercise the leadership that they should have, you know. And so there are those days when you feel the darkness, you know, of the world, and you see the power of evil at work, you know, and not just out there, but sometimes in your own heart too, you know, or the desolation. That's another word that St. Ignatius uses a lot in the spiritual exercises, you know. Mother Teresa talks about it, you know. She had many years, she writes this in her journal, that she felt it very strong when she was younger, and then she just felt a spiritual darkness for many years of her last life. St. John of the Cross calls it the darkness of the soul.
St. Therese of Lisieux refers to the same thing. Yeah?
Exactly, right. So it is through the good times and the bad. It is trusting the faithfulness of God, even as sometimes we don't always hear His voice, or our own faithfulness gets shaky sometimes. And to me, you know, the line of Scripture, especially these days, that always stands out is, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of everlasting life. You know, that this faith has made me the person that I am. You know, hopefully a person of integrity, a person who is trying my best to live the gospel. It is everything to me, you know. This church, this relationship with the Lord is everything to me, you know. This ministry that I feel the Lord has called to me, this life in the Society of Jesus. You know, that's pretty much it. And you know, as I'm saying, some days you feel that strongly, and other days you're hit with desolation, you know. But it's being faithful to that call, and to say, Lord, you are my all, you know. You are it, you know. So fill me up. And help me trust that you walk with me day by day. And that's pretty much where it comes down to, you know. I am, I'd say, blessed because of the spiritual exercises to really feel like I have a pretty strong relationship with Jesus. Sometimes, you know, like I said, some days your prayer is strong, some days it's weak. Something else that really helps me in the day-to-day is the examen of St. Ignatius Loyola.
You maintain that? You continue
that?
Yes,
I try to maintain that every day. Some days, you know, some days I'm better than others. But Ignatius said, you know, he was giving a lecture one time to some Jesuits in training, some scholastics, and he said to them, if your life gets so busy and so kind of chaotic and filled with things that you can only hold on to one prayer every day. Please make it the examine. Hold on to that. And the examine is where, you look back at your day intentionally. Maybe you do it at the end of the day before you go to bed. Maybe you do it when you wake up in the morning. Maybe you do it at lunchtime. And you say, Lord, where have you been talking to me? Where has God's presence been alive that I was so busy or just not aware, just kind of like going through the motions that I missed the face of the Lord right in front of me, maybe through a conversation that I had with somebody, or maybe around this Eucharistic table, you're just kind of like, it's early in the morning, 6:30 at Mass, and your head is not where it should be, and you're not praying it as intentionally as you should be. So you take a moment at the end of the day, and you're like, Lord, there you were, and I could have missed it. Let's reconnect,
Yeah, and God always delivers.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. You probably covered this already. I was going to ask, how did your intimate relationship with God start? And I think you're taking that back to the exercises and its importance in you becoming a priest. Absolutely. Yes, I think we've covered that. So let's move on here. How important is it for you to maintain an intimacy with God? And how do you do so in the busyness of your day? Just what you were alluding to a while ago.
Yes. Okay. Let me just say this briefly on the previous question about entering into intimacy with God. A few years ago, I was in Mississippi, and I going through my mom's attic, and I found a picture that I had drawn when I was maybe 5, 6, 7 years old. And it was a picture of God, my little kid handwriting, and said God at the bottom of it. And it was this weird four-headed monster, okay? It had a head going north, south, east, and west. And it said, little kid handwriting. So that must have been...
was this a smiley God or?
No, all right, that's the thing. It was like God is Big Brother who's always watching you. He's got these heads everywhere. So I was maybe not the best behaved kid, and probably my parents or teachers will say, God is watching you, so you better behave. A perfectly fine image of God, for a kid, especially a kid who wasn't always on his best behavior, But if that had been my only image of God, then I think I would develop a very unhealthy adult spirituality. A God who is always, watching you, waiting to judge you and condemn you. Because what does the first letter of John, chapter 4, say? We got a lot of images in Scripture for God. God is the Good Shepherd, the mighty fortress, stronghold. God is Sophia, wisdom. I mean, there's Scripture's filled with them, but the primary, the central, the most, more than anything else, 1 John chapter 4, God is love. God is love, and all who live in love live in God, And so if I had always just sort of thought of God as the big guy in the sky who's watching over me, waiting to get me the moment I make a mistake, then I would have never been able to develop an adult relationship with God, trusting that God is love and mercy,
Okay, so how did you make the switch?
And that was a long thing, but I have to say it was first of all going to a Jesuit university, making retreats there, but more so it was the spiritual exercises. I should have said that earlier, but that was the fundamental shift in the spiritual exercises, from kind of fear, I've got to be a priest because God is demanding that of me, or I've got to be a good Christian because God is insisting that if I don't do X, Y, and Z, then to a relationship of intimacy, of friendship with the Lord. I no longer call you slaves, but friends, said Jesus. God is love, and all who live in love live in God. That's a relationship based on freedom. It's a relationship based on God who wants what is best for His children, and who calls us, to what brings us peace and to what brings us joy, So that, I don't think people ever lose necessarily some of the element of, is God going to strike me down? But a true healthy relationship, and that's what Ignatius discovered in doing the spiritual exercises as well, that this is not who God is, God is love, God is mercy. Pope Francis said that like almost the day that he was elected, our God is a God whose name is mercy, And however many times we mess up, God is there to pick us up, not 7 times 70 times, you know?
Do the math.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Okay. So, how do you maintain intimacy in the busyness of your day?
Well, like I said, I think prayer is absolutely essential, you know. I think some people I was just thinking about this when I was praying this morning, actually. Some people, lay people with families and whatever, well, my sister was, texting me last night. She's got 3 kids now under the age of 8, and it's chaos. It's always chaos. She can't possibly have time to sit down. I have the luxury of sitting down in the morning and having a meditation for 45 minutes, and she doesn't have that luxury. So I think part of our role as priests is to be faithful to that prayer life on behalf of the people that we minister to,
Yep. Who can't find the time.
Who can't find the time, And so when they come here on Sundays and can get 8 or 10 minutes of inspiration from our homilies, or they come to us for confession or spiritual direction, it's our job to pray so that we can be present to them as ministers and help them finding God in their busyness. And if we're not faithful to that, then we do a much poorer job of being who we are supposed to be to them, So that's one of my, I don't know, that thought I was just in prayer this morning.
I like that, really. So it moves from finding time in your business to ensuring that you're helping them to find time. Despite their business.
Right, exactly, yes. Yeah. And prayer may look differently in different stages of people's life. Even in my own life, it looked differently, certainly in novitiate, than it does now as an active minister. And that's okay, I think.
Saint Therese says, just a glance.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
We have one final question here. Could you tell our viewers how important you believe it is for everyone, not only priests and religious, to have an intimate relationship with God? And can you suggest how we may start such a relationship?
Sure. Well, I would say if you do what you can, as we were just saying, and Ignatius Loyola, that's another hallmark of his spirituality. He always says at the end of every exercise in the spiritual exercises, he says, do this prayer or whatever may greater profit the soul. So he's always saying, do what works. He's very pragmatic that way. That's why Jesuits are never going to tell you, you must do X in order to develop the proper spiritual life. We're always going to tell you, try different things in the spiritual life, working with a priest or a spiritual director or a religious or someone you can trust, and see what works. See the ways that God talks to you at this particular moment in your life. So I'm not going to say there's a prescription, but I would say, if you want to, start with the basic things. I mean, rosary is always great. Doing some adoration in a holy hour is great. But if you want to try or if you can only make it to Mass on Sundays, that's great. And spend 5 minutes before you go to bed calling to mind the graces of the day that God has given you and asking for forgiveness. That's great. But if you want to try and take it to another level and you have the time, so I'm not telling parents of young kids like my sister to do this, but if you've got some time, figuring out a way to try and to make a retreat, you don't have to make an 8-day retreat.
Particularly the Ignatian. That's coming up soon, by the way.
Yes.
So that's a plug for the Ignatian retreat.
I'll make it a plug, exactly, yes. But that can really, retreats are a way to step back from the busyness, from the noise. And man, we live in a society with constant noise, don't we? Plugged into our cell phones and computers 24/7. But that's a way to sort of put all that aside and in the stillness hear this still small voice, that Elijah hears, and you never know, I'm always surprised. We Jesuits we do the 30-day once a year, but then every year we have to make an 8-day retreat, step back into the silence. And I'm always surprised. I go into that very busy thinking, here we go again, and I got to take 8 days of work, and how am I going to handle, who's going to cover for me while I'm gone, and this and that. And then I get there in the silence, and wow, God just starts moving,
Okay.
So do a retreat.
Most unfortunately, we come to the end of our show. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Jeremy, this is answering God's call to Guadalupe Media, I'm Stanley Ermoff. Until we meet again, may God bless you abundantly.